Marie had just lifted her glass when a spoon struck Crystal. "Before anyone makes another toast," Vanessa said, rising from her chair with one hand resting on her stomach, "there's something everyone deserves to know." The laughter around the engagement dinner faded into uneasy silence. Vanessa looked directly at me, then turned toward my fiancé, Daniel. "I'm pregnant." A few gasps rippled through the room. Then she smiled. "And Daniel is the father." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. My mother's wineglass stopped halfway to her lips. Daniel pushed back his chair so quickly it scraped across the hardwood floor. "What?" he said, staring at her. Vanessa folded her arms, calm as if she were announcing the weather. "You heard me." Every face turned toward me, waiting for tears, shouting, denial. Instead, I looked at my sister. She wasn't nervous. She was enjoying it. That was the moment I realized she believed she'd already won. I slowly reached for my glass again. "If everyone's finished listening to Vanessa," I said evenly, "I'd like to make one final toast before anyone leaves." Confused eyes followed my hand as I set a sealed envelope beside my plate. Vanessa's confident smile flickered for the first time. The private dining room had been filled with celebration only minutes earlier. Daniel and I had rented the restaurant's upstairs room for our engagement dinner, inviting both families, close friends, and the handful of people who had watched our relationship grow over the last 4 years. I'd paid for most of the evening myself because I wanted everyone we loved gathered in one place before the wedding. Now every centerpiece, every candle, every carefully planned detail felt like the backdrop to my public execution. Daniel shook his head. "Vanessa, whatever game you're playing, stop." "I'm not playing anything," she replied, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "I stayed quiet because I didn't want to ruin their happiness, but I couldn't keep lying to everyone." Several relatives immediately began whispering. I knew something was off. She wouldn't make something like this up. My father stood first. "Daniel," he said sharply, "tell us the truth." Daniel looked from my parents to me, disbelief written across his face. "There is no truth to tell," he answered. "I've never been with Vanessa." But my parents weren't looking at Vanessa. They were looking at him. That hurt more than I expected. Not one of them asked my sister for proof. Not one of them questioned why she had chosen our engagement dinner to reveal something so devastating. They simply assumed she was telling the truth. Vanessa noticed it too. A slow, satisfied smirk spread across her face. She had always known exactly how to play this room. I noticed something else. Throughout dinner, she'd kept checking her phone, exchanging tiny nods with 2 cousins seated near the back. She wasn't improvising. She had planned every second of this. And unlike everyone else in the room, I already knew she was about to do it. I had known for weeks. Which was exactly why I didn't interrupt her. I simply raised my glass a little higher. "If no one minds," I said quietly, "I'd like everyone to stay for just one more toast." The room fell silent again. No one knew why I suddenly looked relieved instead of heartbroken. 3 weeks earlier, I had been standing in my kitchen addressing wedding invitations when Vanessa wandered in without knocking. She leaned against the counter, picked up one of the envelopes, and smiled. "So, Daniel's flying to Chicago again next month." I looked up. "No, that conference is this month." "Oh," she shrugged casually, "I can't keep up with his travel." At the time, it sounded like harmless conversation. Looking back, it sounded like someone collecting information. Vanessa had always had a talent for making intrusive questions sound innocent. Growing up, she somehow became the center of every family gathering. If she forgot someone's birthday, she was going through a hard time. If I forgot one, I was being inconsiderate. When she dropped out of college twice, my parents insisted she simply hadn't found the right path. When I worked late nights to earn promotions, they called me lucky. Keeping the peace had become my role so naturally that I stopped noticing how often I was expected to sacrifice it. So when Vanessa volunteered to help organize my engagement dinner, I accepted without hesitation. "I want everything to be perfect for you," she'd said, wrapping me in a hug. I believed her. A few days later, that belief cracked. I had stopped by our parents' house to drop off seating cards when I heard Vanessa talking on the back patio. She hadn't seen me. "I've waited long enough," she snapped into her phone. "You don't get to disappear now." Silence. Then she lowered her voice. "If you won't take responsibility, I'll make sure someone else has too." The words stopped me cold. For a moment, I wondered if she was arguing with a coworker. But something about her tone didn't fit. It wasn't frustration. It sounded like calculation. I quietly stepped away before she noticed me. That night, I mentioned the conversation to Daniel. He frowned. "Did she say who she was talking about?" "No." "Does something feel wrong?" I hesitated. "Yes." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then don't ignore it." Those words stayed with me. I wasn't suspicious of Daniel. I was suspicious of a story that didn't make sense. Over the next several days, I quietly checked simple facts. Nothing dramatic. Just dates, travel schedules, reservations I already knew about. Details that could either confirm my instincts or prove I was overthinking everything. Each answer only created more questions. Instead of confronting Vanessa, I made a different decision. If she was planning something private, I'd stop it privately. But if she intended to humiliate me in front of everyone, then the truth deserved the same audience. A week before the engagement dinner, Vanessa caught me alone while everyone else was loading decorations into the restaurant. She smiled as she adjusted one of the floral arrangements. Then she leaned close enough that only I could hear. "By tomorrow," she whispered, "everyone will know who really won." She walked away before I could answer. Watching her disappear through the ballroom doors, I realized one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't warning me. She was counting down. The dining room was no longer a place for celebration. It had become a courtroom. Only no one had asked for evidence. Vanessa's accusation hung in the air while relatives exchanged uneasy glances and whispered behind raised hands. One of my cousins discreetly lowered her phone after recording a few seconds before realizing how serious the situation had become. Daniel stepped away from his chair, disbelief written across his face. "This is insane," he said. "I've never been alone with you, Vanessa, not once." Vanessa laughed softly through watery eyes. "Really? You're going to lie in front of everyone?" She dabbed at the corner of one eye with a napkin, careful not to smudge her makeup. "I didn't want to say anything tonight," she continued, "but I couldn't let Marie marry someone who was living a double life." Several relatives immediately moved closer to her. My aunt wrapped an arm around Vanessa's shoulders. "Oh, sweetheart." Another guest shook his head toward Daniel. "If this is true, you've destroyed two sisters." Daniel looked at me. "Marie, you know she's lying." "I know," I answered quietly. My calm response only seemed to confuse everyone. My father stepped forward, his face hard. "Daniel, the engagement is over until this gets sorted out." "Dad," I began. "No," he interrupted. "Your sister wouldn't invent something like this." Vanessa lowered her eyes, as though she hated being the center of attention. It was a performance. And judging by the room, it was working. People weren't asking questions anymore. They were reaching conclusions. Then Vanessa reached into her purse. "If nobody believes me," she whispered, "I brought proof." She placed her phone on the table and unlocked it. There. A series of screenshots filled the screen. Short messages. A saved contact with Daniel's name. Flirtatious exchanges. One message appeared to read, "I can't stop thinking about last night." A murmur swept across the room. Someone whispered, "That's enough evidence for me." My mother covered her mouth. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief. "I've never sent those messages." Vanessa met his eyes. "So now you're saying I made all of this up?" He reached for the phone. She pulled it back before he could touch it. "No," she said firmly. "You're not deleting anything." More whispers. More suspicious looks. The balance of the room shifted even further toward her. I studied the screen carefully. Not emotionally. Professionally. As a financial auditor, I'd spent years spotting documents that looked convincing until tiny inconsistencies exposed them. The messages were polished. Too polished. The timestamps didn't match the dates she had mentioned only minutes earlier. She hadn't noticed the contradiction. I looked up from the phone and met her gaze. She expected panic. Instead, I smiled politely. "Vanessa," I said, "thank you." Her eyebrows knit together. "For what?" "For making sure everyone is here." The room fell silent again. I slowly stood. "I know emotions are running high," I said, looking around the table. "But accusations this serious deserve complete evidence, not assumptions." Nobody spoke. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. "I only need 5 minutes," I continued. "After that, every person in this room can decide who has told the truth." Without another word, I reached beside my plate. Carefully, I placed a thick sealed envelope on the white tablecloth next to my wine glass. Every eye locked onto it. No one knew what was inside. The room seemed to shrink around the table. No one reached for another drink. No one touched the untouched desserts the servers had quietly placed a few minutes earlier. Every eye remained fixed on the sealed envelope. Vanessa was the first to break the silence. "Marie," she said with a nervous laugh, "this is getting ridiculous. Everyone already knows what happened." I looked at her. "Do they?" She shifted her weight. "You don't need to embarrass yourself any further." Daniel remained standing beside me, saying nothing. He knew I had asked him to trust me, even when I refused to explain why. That trust was about to matter. I rested one hand on the envelope, but made no move to open it. "3 weeks ago," I began, "I realized something about this story didn't add up." Vanessa folded her arms. "What story?" "The one you hadn't told yet." A few guests exchanged puzzled looks. My father frowned. "What are you talking about?" I noticed Vanessa asking unusual questions about Daniel's travel schedule. Then, I overheard a phone conversation where she complained that someone wouldn't take responsibility. Vanessa scoffed. "So now you're spying on me?" "No," I replied calmly. "I listened because you were speaking loudly enough for anyone walking through the house to hear." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Even if that's true, it proves nothing." "You're right," I said. "By itself, it doesn't." I turned toward the rest of the room. "So I didn't accuse anyone." "I checked facts." My mother looked confused. "What facts?" "The only ones that couldn't change." I looked at Daniel. "The dates." Daniel nodded slightly, finally understanding where I was going. I already knew Daniel's business conference schedule because I helped him prepare for the trip. Several relatives nodded. They remembered him talking about it for months. He left on March 3rd. I paused. And he didn't return until March 14th. The room grew noticeably quieter. I continued. After overhearing Vanessa's phone call, I verified those dates using information we already had: flight confirmations, hotel reservations, and conference registration records. Vanessa interrupted quickly. "People can sneak away." "They can," I agreed. "But not from an international conference where every session required badge scans." Her confident expression faltered. For the first time all evening, she looked at the envelope instead of at me. I noticed. So did everyone else. One of our cousins spoke up. I remember Daniel posting photos from that trip almost every day. Another guest added, "Didn't your company share pictures from the conference too?" Daniel answered quietly, "They did." The whispers returned. Only this time, they weren't supporting Vanessa. They were questioning her. She straightened her shoulders. "Fine," she snapped. "Maybe the dates aren't exactly right." A heavy silence followed. She seemed to realize what she had just admitted. I didn't need to point it out. The guests heard it themselves. If the dates weren't right, neither was her certainty. My aunt slowly lowered the comforting hand she'd kept on Vanessa's shoulder all evening. My father looked from Vanessa to me, uncertainty replacing anger. The balance of the room had begun to shift. Vanessa noticed it too. "Those records don't prove anything," she said, her voice rising. "You still haven't shown what's inside that envelope." "No," I answered. "I haven't." I slid the envelope to the center of the table. It contains every document needed to answer one question. I looked directly into my sister's eyes. Who is actually lying tonight? My fingers slipped beneath the flap. The seal broke with a soft tear. Before I could remove a single page. "Don't." Vanessa's voice cracked across the room. Every head turned toward her. Vanessa's shout echoed through the silent dining room. "Don't." Her voice was no longer confident. It was desperate. I looked at her for a long moment before pulling the first document from the envelope. "You wanted everyone here to hear your version," I said quietly. "It's only fair they hear the rest." No one objected. Even my parents remained silent. I laid the papers across the table one by one. "This is Daniel's passport." I opened it to the stamped pages. He departed for London on March 3rd. I placed another document beside it. "These are his airline records." Then another. "These are his hotel check-in and check-out confirmations." Finally, I unfolded a certificate from the International Business Conference. "And these are attendance records showing he scanned into every required session during that week." I looked around the room. The conception window Vanessa claimed tonight overlaps exactly with the period Daniel was overseas. No one spoke. One by one, guests leaned closer to examine the dates. They all matched. Every document confirmed the same timeline. Daniel hadn't even been in the country. My father reached for the passport with shaking hands. He compared the dates himself. Then he looked at Daniel. The words wouldn't come. I gently placed another stack of papers on the table. I wasn't finished. Vanessa's face lost what little color remained. The top page contained printed text messages. Not screenshots. Complete message records. I recognized something strange about the screenshots Vanessa showed earlier, I explained. The timestamps didn't match the dates she described. I slid the printed conversation toward the center of the table. So I requested copies of the messages that had already been shared with me weeks ago. Vanessa immediately stood. "Those are private. They became everyone's business the moment you falsely accused my fiancé in front of both families." She froze. No one defended her this time. I read only the portions that mattered. One message from Vanessa read, "If you won't admit the baby's yours, I'll find someone everyone will believe." Another followed a few days later. "He's respected, stable. They'll never question me if I say it's him." The room fell into complete silence. There was no misunderstanding left. No missing piece. No alternate explanation. The plan had been deliberate. She hadn't chosen Daniel because he was the father. She had chosen him because she believed his reputation made him the perfect target. My mother slowly covered her mouth. "Oh, my God." She turned toward Vanessa. "You wrote this." Vanessa's lips trembled. I didn't mean." "You didn't mean what?" my father asked quietly. To destroy your sister. She couldn't answer. Daniel let out a slow breath he'd seemed to be holding all evening. For the first time since Vanessa had stood to make her announcement, his shoulders relaxed. He looked at me. You knew. I nodded. I suspected. I verified before I believed anyone. He reached for my hand. Thank you. Around the table, relatives who had questioned him moments earlier began apologizing. I'm so sorry. We judged you too quickly. I should have waited. Daniel accepted the apologies politely, but his attention never left me. Across the room, my aunt quietly stepped away from Vanessa. Others followed. Not dramatically. Simply, one by one. The support she'd counted on disappeared, without a single argument. My parents stood in front of me, both visibly ashamed. My father spoke first. We failed you tonight. I looked at him. You didn't fail me tonight. His expression fell. You failed me every time you assumed Vanessa deserved the benefit of the doubt, and I didn't. Neither of them tried to argue. Because they couldn't. They had lived that pattern for years. Tonight had simply exposed it. The engagement dinner ended much earlier than planned. Not because Daniel and I left. Because there was nothing left for anyone to celebrate except the truth. Vanessa quietly gathered her purse and walked out alone. No one followed her. In the weeks that followed, the family learned that the man in the messages was eventually forced to confront his own responsibility. That was no longer my battle. Mine had ended the night the lies were exposed. The months afterward were quieter. Daniel and I canceled the large wedding we'd planned and chose something much smaller instead. Only the people who had stood beside us, or sincerely taken responsibility for their mistakes, were invited. It wasn't about excluding anyone. It was about beginning our marriage with honesty instead of appearances. My relationship with my parents didn't heal overnight. Trust rarely does. But for the first time, our conversations included accountability instead of excuses. They stopped asking me to keep the peace. Instead, they started learning how to keep it themselves. As for me, I finally understood something I'd ignored for years. Protecting someone from the consequences of their choices isn't kindness. It's permission. Standing beside Daniel at our small wedding months later, surrounded by people who valued truth more than comfort, I realized my engagement dinner had never been the end of my future. It had simply exposed the one lie that needed to collapse before the life we were building together could honestly begin.